The envelope was heavier than it should have been, and I noticed that before I noticed anything else. Not the gold seal pressed into the flap like a brand, and not the way Vivienne Calloway set it on the table in front of me with both hands, the way you lay a verdict down, and not the room going quiet the way rooms go quiet when something is about to happen, and only one person knows what it is. Just the weight. I am a forensic accountant, and I have held evidence in my hands hundreds of times. Tax returns and bank statements and shell company filings printed on paper so thin it feels like lying. I know what documents feel like when they are trying to be something other than what they are. I know the difference between paper that is meant to inform and paper that is meant to wound. That envelope weighed 47 grams, and I know this because I weighed it afterward the same way I weigh everything after the fact, carefully and alone and with a tool calibrated for precision. The room had pink balloons everywhere. My friend Delia Okafor had tied them to every chair, back, and there were 71 women in the fellowship hall of Magnolia Grove Baptist Church in Franklin, Tennessee. And there was a white cake on a table near the window with "Welcome" spelled in gold letters across the top. My mother had driven 11 hours from Youngstown, Ohio to be there, and she was sitting 3 seats to my left, wearing the blue dress she saves for good days. Vivienne moved through the room like she owned every inch of it, and she smiled at every single person in it, and then she looked at me. She said she had a gift for the mother of her first grandchild, and she said it the way people say things they have rehearsed in the mirror. I took the envelope. I did not open it right away because I already knew something was wrong. My name is Celeste Armand Whitfield, and I am 34 years old, and I am a certified forensic accountant licensed in the state of Tennessee. I've been married to Marcus Devereaux Whitfield for 4 years, and I have been carrying his daughter for 31 weeks and 4 days. The woman who handed me that envelope had been trying to erase me since the day I walked into her son's life. Stay with me. I grew up on the east side of Youngstown, Ohio, in a house that cost my parents $32,000 and took them 9 years to pay off. My father, Bernard Armand, drove a city bus for 22 years, and his base salary the year I graduated high school was $38,400. He never missed a shift, and he never called in sick unless he was running a fever above 102 degrees, and I know this because he told me once, and then showed me his attendance record because Bernard Armand does not make claims he cannot document. My mother, Elaine Armand, worked the intake desk at a dialysis center on Market Street for 16 years, and she made $26,000 a year, and she brought home leftovers from the center's holiday parties in Ziploc bags and called it bonus dinner. She said it without bitterness. She said most things without bitterness. I watched them manage money the way surgeons manage airways, carefully and with full attention and nothing wasted. I was 17 when I decided I wanted to follow that logic into a profession. I graduated from Youngstown Early College in 2007 with a 3.94 GPA and a partial scholarship to the University of Akron, and I took out $41,200 in student loans to cover the rest. I know the exact number because I made myself memorize it the first week of freshman year. I needed to feel the weight of it so I would not forget why I was there. I graduated in 2011 with a degree in accounting and a minor in finance, and my first job was a staff auditor position at a regional firm in Akron, making $43,000 a year. I bought a 2006 Honda Civic with 94,000 miles on it for $4,800 cash, and I drove it for 3 years. I passed my CPA exam in 2013 and my CFE exam in 2015, and I moved to Nashville in 2016 for a senior associate position at a forensic accounting firm called Callister & Webb at a starting salary of $78,000. I was not impressive to people who had always had things. I was extraordinary to people who knew what it cost to build something from nothing. I found an apartment in the Wedgwood, Houston neighborhood for $1,100 a month, and I cooked 4 nights a week, and I sent $200 home every month, even after my parents told me to stop. I saved. I documented. I will tear. That is who I was when I walked into a fundraiser at the Country Music Hall of Fame on a Tuesday night in April of 2018 and shook the hand of Marcus Devereaux Whitfield. The fundraiser was for a literacy nonprofit called Reading Forward, and my firm had donated a table, and I went because my supervisor asked me to, and because I had learned early that the right rooms matter. Marcus was there representing his family's commercial real estate development company, and he was wearing a dark navy suit and no tie, and he looked like someone who had been told his whole life that he was the most important person in any room, and had decided not to believe it. That last part is what made me stay when he introduced himself. We talked for 40 minutes about nothing important, property tax abatement policy, and the acoustic design of the venue, and a book we had both read about systems thinking. He asked me what I did, and when I explained forensic accounting, he did not glaze over, and he asked a follow-up question. A real one. I gave him my card, and he called the next afternoon. We dated for 8 months before he asked me to move in with him, and we lived together for 7 months before he proposed at a small dinner at his apartment, not a restaurant, and not a grand gesture, but the two of us and food he had cooked himself, and a ring that had been his grandmother's. A round solitaire in a yellow gold setting. Estate jewelry with a story. We were engaged for 9 months and we married in October of 2019 at a venue called the Cordell in downtown Nashville with 112 guests. The venue cost $14,000, and the total wedding budget was $31,000, which we split evenly between my savings and his, because I insisted on that split and he understood why without me explaining it. We bought a house in the Belmont-Hillsborough neighborhood in 2020 with a mortgage of $412,000 on a 3-bedroom Craftsman with original hardwood floors and a porch that faces west. Marcus planted tomatoes in the backyard the first summer, and I hung my CFE certificate in the hallway where I could see it from the kitchen. It was ours, fully and completely ours, until Vivienne Calloway Whitfield decided it wasn't. Vivienne Calloway Whitfield is 63 years old and 5 feet 4 inches tall, and she has silver hair she wears in a chignon and a face that 3 separate people I've interviewed over the years described as elegant. She wears pearl earrings to everything including casual lunches, and she runs the Whitfield Family Trust, which was established by her late father-in-law Reginald Whitfield Sr. in 1987, and which controls approximately $4.2 million in assets, including 3 commercial properties in the greater Nashville area. She chairs the Legacy Giving Committee at Covenant Presbyterian Church in Brentwood, Tennessee, and she has chaired it for 11 years without ever being elected to that position because she appointed herself after the previous chair retired and no one said no. That is the detail that told me everything about her. Vivienne was born Vivienne Calloway in Decatur, Georgia, and her father was an insurance executive and her mother ran the household and the social calendar and 3 separate charitable organizations simultaneously. She grew up understanding that power in a certain kind of world is not taken. It is inherited and maintained and protected from anyone who did not receive it the same way. She married Reginald Whitfield Jr. in 1983, and he died in 2016 from a cardiac event, and she has run the trust alone since then. Marcus is the sole heir, and the trust transfers to him fully at 38, and he turns 38 in 14 months. The first warning sign came 6 weeks after Marcus and I started dating when we went to Sunday dinner at the Whitfield house in Brentwood. I arrived with a dish I had made. A Haitian beef stew my grandmother taught my mother who taught me. And I set it on the counter and Vivienne looked at it for exactly 2 seconds and then said warmly and loudly enough for Marcus's aunt to hear, "How thoughtful. I don't think we've had anything like this before." She poured it into a serving bowl and placed it at the far end of the table away from the main dishes, and no one mentioned it again. I filed it. I did not react. That was her method. Always warm and always deniable, and always in front of people who would later say they didn't think she meant anything by it. Marcus's younger sister Philippa Whitfield Crane is 30 years old, and she is a real estate agent at a boutique firm in Green Hills, Nashville, who drives a white Mercedes CLA and refers to Vivienne as Mother with a capital M in text messages I have since read. Philippa is not cruel the way Vivienne is cruel. She is something more dangerous. She is a follower who does what Vivienne needs done because she has been financially dependent on the trust since she was 22, and she does not know how to exist outside of it. Philippa was present at every incident, and this was not a coincidence. Marcus's college friend, Davis Morrow, is 36 years old, and he attended Vanderbilt with Marcus and married into old Nashville money and spends a significant portion of his social energy reminding people of this. He has never said anything overtly inappropriate in my presence, but he has also never said anything at all, and in 4 years I have not received a direct question from Davis Morrow because the silence was its own message. My allies were clearer. Delia Okafor is 35 years old and a labor and delivery nurse at Vanderbilt University Medical Center, and she has been my closest friend since we met in a spin class in 2017. She has the sharpest instincts of anyone I know and the patience of someone who has spent years in rooms where things can go wrong without warning. My cousin Patricia Armand Josephs is 38 years old and a paralegal at a civil litigation firm in Cleveland, Ohio, who drove down for the baby shower specifically and told me on the phone the week before that she would be there with her eyes open. My colleague Renee Baptiste is 41 years old and a senior partner at Callister & Webb, who mentored me for 2 years when I joined the firm and has a mind like a filing cabinet. Nothing goes in without a place, and nothing comes out unless it is needed. These 3 women were positioned in that fellowship hall when Vivienne handed me the envelope, and they were not there by accident. Vivienne operated in a precise pattern across 4 years, and I documented every incident. The first happened 8 months after our wedding, at a Whitfield family Christmas dinner at the house in Brentwood, where 14 people were present. Vivienne went around the table before the meal and asked each person to name something they were grateful for, and when she reached me, she looked briefly at the ceiling and said, "I am sure Celeste is grateful for everything that has opened up for her this year." Not what I was grateful for. What had opened up for me? I said I was grateful for Marcus, and for the work I loved, and for the people around that table. And she smiled and moved on, and Philippa looked at her plate. I went home and wrote it down in a notes app on my phone, date and location and exact words and witnesses, because that is what I do when I find something that matters. The second incident was at a church gala 9 months later, where I was seated between Marcus and a woman named Harriet Boone, who sits on the Legacy Giving Committee with Vivienne. Vivienne stopped by the table and leaned down and said to Harriet, "You know, Celeste does something with numbers for work. Isn't that something?" And then she was already 3 steps away before Harriet could respond. I have 2 professional certifications and 12 years of experience detecting financial fraud, and I have been deposed as an expert witness in federal court twice. I wrote it down. The third incident was at a brunch at Philippa's house 14 months into our marriage, where I was telling a story about a case I had worked, speaking in hypotheticals and naming no names, and Vivienne interrupted from the other end of the table and said, "I find it so interesting that Celeste sees deception everywhere. I wonder sometimes what that does to a person, whether it makes it hard to trust." She said it the way you say something you've been sitting on for months, and Marcus laughed a little nervously and changed the subject, and I paused and finished my sentence and did not look at her directly. I wrote it down. The fourth incident came shortly after we announced the pregnancy, when Marcus called his mother from the car before he picked me up, even though I had asked to be there for that call. She already knew when I arrived at the house that Sunday, and she kissed my cheek and said to the room, "I did wonder if they were going to wait until Marcus was ready." Marcus was 35 and I was 33, and we had decided together and planned together and tried for 7 months. Marcus said we were both ready, and she had already moved on to discussing the nursery. The fifth and most telling incident happened 3 weeks before the baby shower, when Vivienne and I were alone for 11 minutes in her kitchen while Marcus helped his uncle move furniture upstairs. She was standing at the sink with her back to me when she said, "I want you to know, I think Marcus is going to be a wonderful father. That child is going to have everything, and I will make sure of it no matter what." She said it like a promise and like a warning, and she still had her back to me when she said it, and I said I knew she loved him, and she turned around and looked at me for a long moment and said, "I do." That was the only true thing she said that whole afternoon. I found the document on a Thursday evening in March, when Marcus and I had gone to dinner at the Whitfield house for what Vivienne called a small planning meeting about a family trip to Hilton Head planned for August. After dinner, Marcus and his Uncle Clarence went out to the garage, and Philippa excused herself to take a phone call, and I was in the sitting room alone for 6 minutes. I was not snooping, and I was not suspicious of anything specific in that moment. I was sitting in the chair nearest the fireplace with my hands on my stomach, feeling the baby move, and looking at the bookshelves the way you look at bookshelves when you have nothing else to do. There was a manila folder on the side table labeled with one word in Vivian's handwriting: trust. I do not know exactly why I opened it. Professional instinct. Muscle memory. The particular stillness of a room that is hiding something. Inside was a 22-page document titled Addendum to the Whitfield Family Trust, Conditions of Inheritance, with a date 3 months prior and 2 signatures, Vivian's and a notary stamp from a firm in Brentwood I recognized as specializing in estate modifications. My hands did not shake because my hands never shake when I find something. My pulse went to 94 beats per minute, and I know this because I checked my watch. The addendum created a conditional inheritance clause stipulating that Marcus's full inheritance of the trust at 38 was contingent on a marriage that met a set of criteria defined in Exhibit A. Criteria that included documented proof of shared cultural background, defined in a list, and proof of participation in the church community at Covenant Presbyterian, and a character assessment to be conducted by Vivienne and 2 committee members of her choosing at a time of her choosing, and a character assessment to be conducted by Vivienne. Exhibit A was a list of 8 items about what kind of woman I needed to be, and what conditions my unborn daughter would need to meet to receive her own inheritance from the family she was being born into. I photographed every page with my phone, 22 pages, and I photographed the notary stamp separately, and I photographed the folder label in context so you could see where it sat in that room. Then I closed the folder and set it back exactly where it was, and sat down in the chair. Marcus came back inside 7 minutes later, and I smiled and said I was tired, and could we head home? And he said, of course, and kissed his mother on the cheek, and she said, drive safe, sweetheart, and I said good night, and I drove home in the passenger seat with my phone in my bag, and 22 pages of photographs on it, and I did not say a single word about any of it because I had work to do first. The next morning, I emailed Renee Baptiste and asked if she had 45 minutes that week for a hypothetical conversation, and Renee has been practicing long enough to know that hypothetical means real, so she called me that afternoon. I described the document without naming anyone and asked about the enforceability of conditional inheritance clauses tied to personal criteria including marriage composition, and she said those clauses are legal in Tennessee in private trusts, but that courts have increasingly scrutinized them when the conditions involve protected class characteristics. She asked what the specific conditions were, and I read her 3 of the 8 items from Exhibit A, and she was quiet for 4 seconds before she said, "Celeste, is this hypothetical?" I said not entirely, and she said, get a copy of the full trust document, not just the addendum. You need to know what she had before she changed it. I called Patricia that evening because Patricia has been a paralegal for 11 years and knows how to pull public filings. The Whitfield Family Trust had been amended twice before, once in 2010 and once in 2010 and once in 2017, and both prior amendments were filed with the county. The new addendum was not yet filed. It was still in a manila folder on a side table in a sitting room in Brentwood, which meant Vivienne had not finished executing it yet, and which meant she had planned to hand me something public first. I searched the notary firm and found a minor disciplinary note from 2019, not disqualifying but documented. I searched Vivienne's name in conjunction with the church committee and pulled 2 years of minutes from the Legacy Giving Committee posted publicly on the church's website, and in those minutes found 3 references to a scholarship fund she had proposed with named eligibility criteria that mirrored 2 of the items in Exhibit A. She had been building this for years. The financial angle was clear. If Marcus did not meet the conditions, she could retain control of the trust beyond his 38th birthday through a provision in the original document that allowed the trustee to extend their term in the event of contested conditions. She would remain trustee and retain control of $4.2 million and 3 commercial properties and the power she had spent 40 years accumulating. The baby shower was in 11 days, and I now understood why she had organized it so carefully. She planned to hand me that envelope in front of 71 people because she believed I would open it and be humiliated and say nothing, and the room would watch and understand without being told that I did not belong there. I photographed everything I had and backed it up to 2 cloud accounts and a USB drive I kept at work and printed the full set and put it in a manila envelope in my laptop bag. Then I went to bed. The week before the baby shower, I went to work every day and I closed a 3-month fraud investigation on Monday and delivered a 114-page final report that my supervisor called the cleanest filing he had seen in a decade. On Tuesday, I had my 31-week prenatal appointment, baby girl and 7 pounds projected at delivery and heart rate perfect, and I drove home and made chicken and rice and went to sleep at 10. On Wednesday, I sat across from Marcus at the kitchen table and listened to him talk about a deal his firm was closing, and he reached over and held my hand, and I almost told him. I almost said, there is a document and there is a list, and your mother has been building a case for removing me from your life since before we were married. I did not say it because he would have called her immediately and confronted her with noise and feeling and no strategy, and she would have moved the document or had it filed or destroyed and the window would have closed. I needed her to bring it to me. She had planned to hand me something in front of witnesses, and I was going to let her. On Thursday, I had lunch with Delia and told her enough. I told her to sit on my left side and watch the room, not me, when Vivienne stood up to speak. Delia said, "So something is going to happen." I said something was always going to happen, and I just knew now what it was. On Friday, I sent Patricia a text that said, "Sit near Renee." She texted back one word, "Ready." Saturday morning, I charged my phone to 100% and transferred the backup files one more time and put the printed copy in my bag alongside my prenatal vitamins and a granola bar and a lip balm. I got 8 hours of sleep. I woke up the morning of the baby shower at 7 and made oatmeal with sliced banana and a small amount of almond butter, the same breakfast I eat before any professional event where I need to be fully present for more than 3 hours because my body knows this meal means something is happening today. I wore a dress I had bought 6 weeks prior specifically for this occasion, dusty rose and not the pink on every balloon and banner and paper plate that Vivienne had ordered, a different pink that was mine. Marcus drove me, and he was happy and easy and talking about his afternoon plans, and he kissed me at the door of Magnolia Grove Baptist Church at 11:47 and said, "Have fun. Tell me everything after." I said, "I will." The fellowship hall was fully decorated, and Vivienne had been there since 9, pink and gold and white with balloon arches and floral arrangements and gold table runners and gold lettering on the cake, and everything coordinated to look like the inside of someone's aspirational vision board. My mother was near the front in the blue dress. Delia was 2 seats to my left. Patricia was at a round table near the back with Renee. 3 women from Marcus's church who had never spoken to me directly were seated near the windows, and 2 of Vivienne's committee friends I recognized from the church website were near the front. Philippa was at the gift table, and she waved when I arrived and smiled the smile she uses when she is nervous. I found my seat and placed my bag underneath my chair and put my hand on my stomach, and the baby moved, and I said quietly, "I know." Me too. The first hour was games, diaper changing relay and baby trivia, and a guessing game with melted chocolate in diapers that was exactly as unpleasant as it sounds, and I laughed and played and was fully present because that is what the moment required. Vivienne moved through the room like a host who had rehearsed the whole event as a performance, and she refilled glasses and complimented every outfit and crouched next to guests and whispered things that made them smile because she was doing what she always did, building a room full of witnesses who would later say she was so gracious and she loved Celeste so much. At 1:47, she stood at the front of the room and called for attention, and she was holding the envelope in both hands with the gold seal catching the light, and she said, "Before we move to gifts, I want to say a few words about my daughter-in-law." She said when Marcus told her he had met someone she prayed for, that someone, and she prayed she would be worthy of this family and understand what the Whitfield name carries and what it requires. She said she had prepared something she wanted to share with Celeste today in front of the women who loved her because she deserved to know exactly what she thought of her future in this family. She walked toward me and set the envelope on the table in front of me with both hands, and the room leaned in. I looked at the envelope for 3 seconds, and I looked at Vivienne's face, and she was smiling. I picked it up and broke the gold seal with my thumb, and inside was a folded set of pages on cream paper printed in a serif font that matched the party stationery. It was not a letter. It was a document titled A Mother's Reflection on the Whitfield Family Legacy, presented to Celestine Armand Whitfield. The first paragraph said she had spent 2 years reflecting on what this family needed, and that Marcus deserved someone who shared his faith tradition, and that a child born into the Whitfield name would need to be rooted in certain values that required certain foundations. I turned to the next page, and there it was, Exhibit A, the same 8 criteria from the addendum to the trust, now presented not as a legal document, but as a set of personal reflections and a mother's concerns and a grandmother's hopes, written in the first person and printed on party stationery with a small floral border. Item 1 required documented proof of active membership in a Protestant congregation with a minimum of 3 years continuous attendance. Item 2 required family background reflecting a shared cultural heritage as defined by the Whitfield family's established community ties. Item 3 required professional standing consistent with the expectations of families of means in the greater Nashville area. Item 4 required personal references from no fewer than 3 individuals known to the Whitfield family circle. Item 5 required demonstrated commitment to the customs and social expectations of the Whitfield name as assessed by the family trustee. Item 6 required willingness to raise children in the traditions of the Whitfield family faith and social community. Item 7 required agreement to consult with the family trustee on matters of estate education for any children born into the family. Item 8 required acknowledgement that the above conditions formed the basis for the child's eligibility for full Whitfield trust benefits, my daughter, her inheritance, conditional on whether I was enough. I read to the end of the document, and there was a 9th page that had not been part of Exhibit A in the trust addendum. It was handwritten across the top, Vivienne's handwriting, above an email printout dated 4 months prior between Vivienne and her attorney at Kellerman and Associates. Vivienne had written, "I need to move quickly before the child is born. Once the baby arrives, Marcus will be harder to separate from the situation. The addendum needs to be bulletproof. The girl is smart. She will find it eventually. We need it filed before she does." Her attorney had written back that the timeline was tight and that he wanted to flag again that conditioning inheritance on these specific criteria created legal exposure and that the language in items 1 and 2 in particular was problematic. Vivienne had responded, "File it. I have handled Marcus before." That last page had been printed separately and had slipped between the cream pages because the envelope was overfilled and Vivienne had not checked. She had handed me her own confession. The woman to my right read over my shoulder and made a small involuntary sound like she had walked into something in the dark. My mother looked at me from 3 seats away. Delia reached under the table and found my hand. Vivienne's face had been composed for 40 seconds, and at 41 seconds it was not. She had not seen the last page, and she was watching my face for the collapse she had planned for, and she was not seeing it. She was watching me read calmly and turn pages, and she was recalibrating in real time. I set the document on the table and called Marcus, and he picked up on the second ring, and I said, "Marcus, I need you to come to the church now. Bring your phone." He asked what was wrong, and I said nothing is wrong and I need you here, and he said he was on his way. I set my phone on the table and folded my hands and waited. Marcus arrived in 14 minutes, still wearing the clothes he had put on for his afternoon plans, and he came in through the side door and scanned the room and found me and walked directly to my chair. He asked if I was okay and if the baby was okay, and I said we were both fine and told him to sit down. I slid the document across the table to him, and he picked it up and read slowly, because he is a careful reader who does not skim. His expression was neutral through the first page, because he had heard this kind of language from his mother before in different forms. His jaw tightened on the second page. On the third page, he put the document flat on the table and looked at it for a moment before continuing. He read each subsequent page the way I had, carefully and without rushing, and when he reached the 9th page, his face became something I will carry for a long time. Not anger, not immediately, the face of someone watching a building they thought was solid shift 2 inches to the left. He read, "I have handled Marcus before." He set the last page down and he did not look at me first. He looked at his mother. Vivienne was standing near the gift table, very still, and Marcus said, "Mom." Not loudly, but the room heard it because the room was completely silent. And he said, "What is this?" She said everything in that document came from love and from a place of wanting to protect the family. And he said, "You contacted an attorney. You filed an addendum to the trust. You created conditions on my daughter's inheritance before she was born." His voice was measured and precise, and she said she was going to tell him, and she had wanted to discuss it first, and the timing was just, and he said, "The email. The 9th page. Tell me what that means." She had gone pale, and she said she didn't know what page he was referring to, and he said, "You told your attorney you needed to move before the baby came because once the baby was here, I would be harder to separate from the situation." She said that was out of context, and he said, "What context makes that sentence different from what it says?" Philippa had moved to stand beside her mother, and she said Marcus was just trying to protect the family legacy, and he looked at Philippa for a long moment and asked if she had known about this. She looked at the floor. He asked again, and she said their mother had mentioned she was thinking about some changes to the trust, and she didn't know the specifics. A woman named Janet Hooper, who had sat with Vivienne on the legacy giving committee for 6 years, stood up from near the back of the room and gathered her purse and her jacket and walked to the door without saying anything. Someone else left after her, and then another woman. Vivienne said people were misunderstanding, and she wanted to explain what she had intended, and Marcus said, "You intended to present a list of reasons my wife doesn't belong in this family." At her baby shower, in front of 70 women, while she was 8 months pregnant. He said it without raising his voice, and then he said, "And you planned it so she would have no warning and no support, and you would be surrounded by witnesses who would see her fall apart." Vivienne's composure cracked then in a specific way, not tears and not anger, but something older that looked like grief. And she said, "I have spent 40 years building what this family is. 40 years. And you don't understand what it costs to hold something together when the world is always trying to pull it apart." She said it like she had said it before to herself many times, and Marcus said, "I understand it cost you something. I'm sorry for that. It doesn't make this right." I had been sitting with my hands folded on the table since Marcus arrived, and I had said nothing, and Vivienne looked at me then, directly at me, and for the first time that afternoon, she was not performing. I said, "The addendum was never filed. I checked 3 days ago. If you withdraw it in the next 30 days, there is no legal record. That is the door. The rest is between you and Marcus." She stared at me and I said nothing else. Vivienne walked to the door at her normal pace in her pearl earrings with her back straight, and Philippa followed 2 steps behind, and the door closed and the room was absolutely quiet, and the pink balloons drifted and the cake sat on the table with welcome still spelled in gold. No one left for several minutes after that. My mother came to me first and sat in the chair Marcus had been sitting in, and put both hands on my face and looked at me for a long moment without saying anything, because she is Elaine Armand and she knows when words are not the thing. Delia sat on my other side and said, "You knew." I said I found it 3 weeks ago, and she said, "You sat through that entire party knowing." I said I needed Vivienne to hand it to me in front of witnesses, and Delia said one word under her breath that I will not repeat here, but it was said with complete admiration and no malice. Renee came from the back of the room and set her hand on my shoulder and said she was going to make a call tomorrow morning, and she knew the right person at Kellerman and Associates. Patricia sat across from me and said she had it on video from 4 different angles. Marcus came back to the table and sat next to me and looked at the documents still lying there, and then looked at me and asked how long I had known, and I said 3 weeks, and he asked why I hadn't told him, and I said, "Because you love her. And I needed you to see it without me being the one who showed it to you." He picked up the 9th page again and read, "I have handled Marcus before." He set it down and said, "I don't know her." I put my hand on his hand. A woman named Gloria Tate, who had been on Vivian's committee for 4 years, approached the table and stopped in front of me and said, "I want to tell you I'm sorry. I watched some things I should have named. I didn't. I'm sorry." I said thank you, and she nodded and left. The food was still on the tables, and the balloons were still up, and somewhere near the cake the gold letters were starting to peel at the corners because the frosting underneath was warm. Marcus stayed, and he never left that room. Marcus went to see his mother alone 10 days later, and came home and sat at the kitchen table while I made tea, and we sat across from each other. He said she cried the whole time, and I asked what she said, and he said she was afraid that she had watched the family lose things over the years, and she had spent 40 years making sure nothing else was lost, and she didn't know how to stop. He said she told him something he hadn't known about her own marriage, about things Reginald did in the first years that she had never told anyone, and about what she had given up to hold the family together. He said he thought she had built the control because she had no control over those early years, and he was not saying it was right, but he understood something now that he hadn't before. I said, "I know." He said she had asked if she could call me, and I said, "Not yet." We changed the locks on our house that same week and contacted our own estate attorney, a woman named Sandra Louie at a firm in downtown Nashville, and established a separate trust for our daughter outside of the Whitfield Trust, funded entirely from our own assets. Sandra drafted a letter to Kellerman and Associates outlining the legal vulnerabilities in the addendum and the conditions under which we would be willing to allow the matter to close without further action.